This is a story about love, but not the kind you see in movies. Stay tuned, this one feels a little too real. Ji-hoon Kong was not the kind of man who talked about money. At 35, he carried himself with quiet restraint, tall, lean build, sharp jawline, calm dark eyes that rarely revealed what he felt. He dressed simply, neutral sweaters, structured charcoal coats, polished black shoes. In Seoul's glittering Gangnam district, where luxury defined worth, he looked almost invisible. Min-seo noticed him because he didn't try to be noticed. She was 29, elegant, long silky black hair cascading over tailored cream blouses, expressive eyes that betrayed every thought. She valued stability, security, a future she could predict. When they first met at a quiet cafe near the Han River, rain streaked softly against the window. Ji-hoon listened more than he spoke. Min-seo talked about ambition. About wanting comfort. About never wanting to struggle like her parents had. He nodded. He didn't tell her that he understood struggle too well. For the first 6 months, everything felt steady. Ji-hoon never missed dinner plans. He remembered the smallest details, how Min-seo preferred jasmine tea, how she avoided crowded subway cars, how she disliked overly flashy restaurants. He never flaunted wealth. But he never looked poor either. Min-seo assumed he was stable. Quietly successful. The kind of man who didn't need to boast. When they walked through Myeongdong at night, neon lights reflecting on wet pavement, she would glance at designer storefronts. He noticed. He never pulled her inside. Not because he couldn't, but because every one he earned was already spoken for. One evening, she asked casually, "Do you own your apartment?" He paused for half a second. "I'm still working on things," he replied gently. It wasn't a lie. But it wasn't the full truth either. The shift began at a birthday dinner. Min-seo's friends arrived in sleek cars. Designer handbags. Confident laughter. Conversations about property investments and overseas vacations filled the private dining room. Ji-hoon wore a simple black suit. Well-fitted. Clean. Unbranded. He felt their eyes measuring him. "What do you do again?" one friend asked lightly. "Project coordination," Ji-hoon answered. Calm. "How much does that pay these days?" The table laughed. Min-seo smiled, but her fingers tightened around her glass. She had never asked him directly about his salary. She had assumed. That night, on the taxi ride home, silence stretched between them. Seoul's skyline shimmered outside the window. Min-seo finally spoke. "Ji-hoon, you are financially stable, right?" He looked at her softly. "I'm responsible," he said. It was not the answer she wanted. Over the next weeks, Min-seo began noticing things she had ignored. Ji-hoon declined a weekend trip to Busan. Said he had family matters. He hesitated before paying for dinner once, only once, but she noticed. He checked his phone frequently when he thought she wasn't looking. Late at night, while she slept beside him in his modest maple apartment, he would sit at the small kitchen table reviewing documents under dim light. Bills. Transfers. Numbers that didn't add up to comfort. Min-seo woke once and watched him quietly. His shoulders looked heavier than usual. "Are you struggling?" she asked gently. He turned, surprised. "No," he said calmly. "I'm managing." Managing. The word echoed in her mind long after she fell back asleep. The truth did not explode. It revealed itself slowly. Min-seo discovered it by accident, a bank notification flashing briefly on Ji-hoon's phone while he showered. Large outgoing transfer. Not savings. Debt repayment. Her chest tightened. When she confronted him that evening, rain pouring against the balcony glass, he didn't deny it. "I'm paying off my father's debts," he admitted quietly. "It will take time." How much time? She asked, voice trembling. A few more years. Years. She had imagined engagement rings. Property. Stability. Not debt. Not waiting. Seoul city lights flickered behind them like distant promises. For the first time, Min-seo looked at Ji-hoon not as the man she loved, but as the future she feared. Min-seo did not leave immediately. She tried to be rational. Mature. Understanding. For days, she replayed Ji-hoon's quiet confession in her mind. Paying off his father's debts. A few more years. Managing. But in Seoul, a few more years could mean falling behind forever. At lunch with her friends in Apgujeong, conversations circled around engagement timelines and apartment investments. One friend showed off a diamond ring, laughing about how her fiancé had secured property before proposing. Min-seo smiled politely, but her thoughts were elsewhere. That evening, she visited Ji-hoon's Mapo apartment again. The space suddenly felt smaller. The kitchen table where he studied bills looked less like responsibility, and more like limitation. When he wrapped his arms around her from behind, gentle and familiar, she stiffened slightly. He felt it. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. She hesitated. "I just need to think." The argument began quietly. It always did with Ji-hoon. "I can wait," he said calmly. "We don't have to rush marriage." "But I'm almost 30, Min-seo replied, voice tightening. "I can't build a future on uncertainty." He didn't raise his voice. He never did. "I am certain about you." She looked at him then, tall, composed, sincere. And for a moment, she almost broke. But love did not erase fear. "Are there any other debts?" she asked carefully. He paused. "Just slightly." No. It was the truth. But not the whole truth. She noticed the pause. Outside, Seoul traffic hummed under a gray afternoon sky. Inside, silence stretched between them like a thin crack in glass. The next week, Min-seo made a decision she told herself was practical. She met with a former university acquaintance, Dae-hyun Lee. He worked in finance. Drove a polished black sedan. Spoke confidently about markets and overseas opportunities. He did not hesitate when discussing his income. He did not pause when speaking about the future. As they walked along the Cheonggyecheon stream at night, city lights reflecting in the water, Dae-hyun said, "A woman shouldn't have to struggle beside a man. Stability is love too." The words settled deeply inside her. Later that night, Ji-hoon called. She watched his name glow on her screen. She didn't answer. For the first time in 2 years, she let it ring. When she finally ended it, there were no screams. Just exhaustion. "I can't keep waiting," she said quietly inside his apartment. "I need certainty." Ji-hoon stood still, absorbing the words. "I would have given you everything," he replied softly. "I know," she whispered. "But love isn't always enough." That sentence lingered between them like smoke. He did not beg. He simply nodded once. "If this is what you need," he said. As she packed her things, he remained in the kitchen, hands resting against the counter, eyes lowered. He did not tell her about the hospital transfers. He did not tell her why the debt mattered beyond money. He let her walk out believing the simplest version of him. Weeks passed. Min-seo's life became visibly brighter. Upscale restaurants. Business events. Photos taken against rooftop views of Seoul's skyline. Dae-hyun introduced her proudly as someone with good taste. She told herself she felt secure. But late at night, when the city quieted, she would remember Ji-hoon's steady gaze. The way he listened. The way he never made her feel small. One evening, scrolling through social media, she noticed something unexpected. A tagged photo. Ji-hoon. Standing outside a hospital. beside a young woman with a pale face and fragile smile. Captioned, "Thank you, Appa. I'm alive because of you." Min-seo's heart stopped. Alive? What had he never told her? Min-seo stared at the photo long after the screen dimmed. The hospital logo was clear. The young woman beside Ji-hoon looked fragile, her skin pale against the white corridor walls. But she was smiling, the kind of smile people wear after surviving something they almost didn't. Appa. The word echoed in her mind. She had met Ji-hoon's parents once, briefly. He had never mentioned a sister. The next morning, unable to quiet her thoughts, she returned to the hospital shown in the photo. The sterile scent of disinfectant filled the air as nurses moved quickly past. Then she saw him. Ji-hoon stood near the reception desk, wearing a simple navy coat, holding a stack of documents. He looked thinner. More tired. He wasn't alone. The young woman from the photo sat in a wheelchair beside him. Min-seo didn't approach immediately. She listened instead. "Your next treatment is covered," Ji-hoon said quietly, kneeling slightly to meet the young woman's eyes. "Don't worry about the cost." "But Appa, you've already done too much," she replied weakly. He smiled faintly. "You're my family." Family. The word hit Min-seo harder than any accusation. A nurse handed him another form. The amount printed at the bottom was larger than any single transfer she had seen on his phone. Suddenly, the debt made sense. The late nights. The hesitation at dinner. The years he needed. He wasn't drowning in irresponsibility. He was holding someone above water. Min-seo stepped back slowly before he could see her. For the first time since she left, shame began to rise in her chest. That night, Min-seo confronted him. Not with anger. With trembling restraint. They met at a quiet park near the Han River, the same place they had first talked about their dreams. "You have a sister," she said softly. Ji-hoon didn't look surprised. "Yes. Why didn't you tell me?" He stared at the river, lights shimmering across the water. "Because it wasn't your burden to carry." "She could have died," Min-seo whispered. He nodded once. "I know." There was no drama in his voice. No self-praise. Just fact. "How long?" she asked. "Since before I met you." The weight of that answer pressed heavily between them. "My father's debts weren't business failures," Ji-hoon continued quietly. "They were medical loans." Min-seo felt her throat tighten. "She was diagnosed at 19. I was already working. There was no one else." He finally turned to face her fully. His dark eyes were steady, but tired. "I didn't tell you because I knew what it would mean. Years of paying. Years of choosing hospital corridors over vacations." She remembered every time he declined trips. Every time he smiled and said, "Next time." "You thought I would leave," she whispered. "I didn't want to find out." His honesty was not defensive. It was gentle. And somehow that hurt more. Min-seo walked home alone that night. Seoul felt different. Quieter. Heavier. She replayed every conversation where she had demanded certainty. Every moment she had measured love against income. Ji-hoon had never lied. He had simply chosen silence over risking rejection. At her apartment, Dae-hyun texted her about a weekend getaway in Jeju. A photo of business class tickets followed. She stared at the message. Then she opened Ji-hoon's contact instead. Her thumb hovered over the call button. For the first time, she understood that stability could mean sacrifice, and love could mean staying through uncertainty. But she had already walked away. The question now wasn't whether she loved him. It was whether she deserved him. Min-seo did not sleep that night. By morning, the certainty she once chased felt hollow. Dae-hyun arrived outside her apartment in his polished black sedan, sunglasses resting against a perfectly pressed suit. He leaned casually against the car, confidence effortless. You look tired, he observed lightly. Big decisions? She forced a smile. As they drove through Gangnam's glass towers, he spoke about expanding investments overseas. About upgrading to a larger property next year. About how timing was everything. She listened, but not the way she used to. At a red light, she caught her reflection in the window. Perfect hair. Composed face. Unsettled eyes. Across the street, a bus passed by with a hospital advertisement printed along its side. Her chest tightened again. Later that afternoon, Min-seo returned to the hospital alone. She told herself she only wanted clarity. Closure. Ji-hoon wasn't there. But his sister was. The young woman sat by the window in a recovery room, sunlight soft against her fragile features. She looked stronger than before. Are you Min-seo? She asked gently, recognizing her from photos. Min-seo nodded, surprised. Appa talked about you, she said with a small smile. He said you deserved an easy life. The words struck deeper than accusation ever could. He sold the apartment my parents left us, she continued softly. He moved somewhere smaller so I could continue treatment. Min-seo felt the room tilt slightly. The Mapo apartment. It had never been temporary struggle. It had been chosen sacrifice. Outside the hospital, the world moved normally. Couples laughed. Delivery scooters rushed past. The city breathed without pause. Min-seo stood still. She remembered the night she told Ji-hoon love wasn't enough. Now she understood something else. Love had been enough for him. She dialed his number before she could overthink it. He answered on the third ring. Min-seo. Her name sounded steady in his voice. Not bitter. Not cold. Can we talk? She asked quietly. A pause. Yes. They agreed to meet at the Han River again. The same place beginnings and endings seemed to gather. The evening sky over the Han River glowed in muted pink and gold. Ji-hoon arrived first. Navy coat. Hands resting calmly at his sides. He looked exactly as he always had. Composed. Steady. But now she saw the weight beneath that calm. I went to the hospital, she began. He nodded once. You should have told me, she said, voice unsteady. I didn't want you to feel obligated, he replied gently. I wasn't obligated, she whispered. I was in love. The confession hung between them. Raw. For the first time, emotion flickered visibly across his face. You chose what felt safe, he said quietly. She swallowed. And you chose to carry everything alone. I was afraid, Min-seo admitted. Afraid of struggling. Afraid of uncertainty. Ji-hoon looked at her for a long moment. I was afraid too, he said softly. Afraid you'd leave if you knew. They both stood in the truth of it. No villains. Just fear. I ended things with Dae-hyun, she continued. His expression didn't change immediately. Why? He asked. Because comfort without love feels empty. The river wind moved between them. He exhaled slowly. Love isn't easy with me, he warned gently. There will still be hospital bills. There will still be waiting. She stepped closer. I'm not afraid of waiting anymore. But love, once broken by doubt, does not mend instantly. The question was no longer about money. It was about trust. Ji-hoon did not step forward immediately. He had loved Min-seo quietly, patiently. But love tested by doubt leaves hairline fractures. You left when it became heavy, he said gently. What happens when it's heavy again? The question wasn't accusation. It was fear. Min-seo felt it clearly now, not pride, not ego, just a man who had learned to carry everything alone. I can't change that I left, she replied softly. But I can choose differently now. The river breeze moved between them, cool and steady. For once, she did not speak about stability. Or timelines. Or certainty. I don't want a perfect future, she said. I want a real one. Ji-hoon studied her eyes carefully. For the first time, he wasn't trying to protect her from difficulty. He was deciding whether to trust her with it. Weeks passed slowly. They did not rush back into what they were. Min-seo visited the hospital with him for the first time. She sat beside his sister during treatment, holding her hand when the needle made her flinch. Ji-hoon watched quietly from across the room. There was no glamour in fluorescent lighting. No romance in medical bills stacked neatly on a tray. But there was presence. Afterward, as they walked outside into pale winter sunlight, Ji-hoon finally spoke. You don't have to prove anything. I'm not proving, she answered gently. I'm choosing. This time, her voice carried no hesitation. Recovery was not instant. Trust returned in quiet gestures, shared meals, long conversations, small laughter that felt unfamiliar at first. Min-seo adjusted her expectations. Fewer luxury dinners. More evenings at home. One night in the modest maple apartment kitchen, she helped Ji-hoon prepare simple ramen while snow fell outside the window. Are you sure this life won't disappoint you? He asked softly. She smiled faintly. It already did once, she replied honestly. Because I misunderstood it. He paused. Then smiled back, small, but real. Outside, Seoul's skyline glowed beyond falling snow. Inside, warmth felt earned. Months later, Ji-hoon's sister rang the small brass bell mounted near the oncology ward. Treatment complete. The sound echoed gently through the hallway. Ji-hoon stood still, eyes glossy for the first time. Min-seo reached for his hand without thinking. He didn't pull away. Outside the hospital, spring air carried a softness winter never allowed. For years, he said quietly, I thought love meant shielding people from struggle. And now? She asked. He looked at her. Now I think it means letting them stand beside you. She squeezed his hand. This time, she did not measure the future by numbers. She measured it by presence. 1 year later, they returned to the Han River. No dramatic proposals. No expensive rings. Just quiet understanding. Ji-hoon stood beside her, hands in coat pockets, watching the water move steadily forward. You know it still won't be easy, he said lightly. She nodded. I'm not looking for easy. He turned to her then, no fear in his expression this time. Just openness. He didn't promise wealth. He didn't promise certainty. He simply said, stay. And she did. Because this was a story about love, but not the kind you see in movies. The kind that breaks under fear, and rebuilds under truth.